Hey, I went to the Kingdom Hall this morning. Don't ask me why, it just popped into my mind to go. So I did. Anyway, first it was the talk. Um, it literally just said all the things they've been saying practically since the late 1800s, using the same scriptures, the same topics. I haven't been to that many meetings, but they, a lot of them seem so the same, especially these talks. We are not of this world. Are we going to vote? No. We already cast our vote for God's kingdom, and we should not be overly concerned with what's going on in the world. For example, the election. Then he was talking about Revelation chapter 12, as they often do, verses 7 through 9, and verse 12. I'm always intrigued at the verses they leave out. When they do that, does it take really that much longer to read the two verses in between so you can get more context? Verses 10 and 11 say, "Now have come the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Messiah. For the accuser of our brothers and sisters, who accuses them before our God day and night, has been hurled down. They triumphed over him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. They did not love their lives so much as to shrink from death." Then he said one of their standard lines. I've heard this before. Do you experience love outside of Jehovah's organization? No. Then the Watchtower study was much more interesting. So the first part was about 1 Corinthians 5, one of their favorite texts, about removing wrongdoers for serious sin. So that all was just the same things they always talk about from there. But what was really different was the huge amount of time and repetition devoted to the follow-up passage of Paul's in 2 Corinthians 2, which I'm assuming they have not highlighted too much in the past. I'm going to check out that. Did you ever see that heat map of all the scriptures they use and how many times they are referenced since 1950? If you haven't, that is a really brilliant tool, but I'm going to look at that and see how often they've actually referenced 2 Corinthians chapter 2, the follow-up, and really goes well with that explaining 1 Corinthians 5. But they spent so much time on points from there, and the comments went on and on and on, and to me it seemed like they were all just reiterating the same thing about loving the person that's reinstated, not holding it against them or kind of avoiding them or looking down on them. And it just went on and on. I felt like they were using a propaganda technique of repetition, because this was another change, and the more it's repeated, I guess they'll just focus on that rather than what they had been doing before. The speaker mentioned how they used to make a repentant sinner wait for 1 year before being reinstated, but not anymore. He said, "Our enlightenment is amazing. We're getting more in line with Jehovah. Look at Peter. He repented and was taken back right away." He also mentioned how they previously were not allowed to clap when someone got reinstated, but as of May 2016, they can now clap. He called it, quote, "a realignment of Jehovah's thoughts." I cannot remember if it was a speaker or the commenter who said the copper is being replaced with gold. I think that's just a new line they use sometimes. It kind of reminds me of new light, but it's a little change up there, I think that's from Isaiah. For me, a change just going personally was there was no love bombing. That has happened to me every single time I've been, and I've never gone to the same one enough that they would recognize me at all or anything. And I'm sure it was obvious in a small group like that I was a visitor. So I thought that was a change, because I was sitting there for quite a while. I didn't come in like right when it was starting. Then after, the lady next to me did introduce herself, and we exchanged names. And I remarked how wow, they're changing the shunning policy. And then she said shunning was never a word used, and she never heard it in the Kingdom Hall. That was only a word outsiders used. I told her I was pretty sure it had been used. I mentioned to her that the organization is suffering, risking government grants in some countries, with severe shunning being part of the reason. I also mentioned the recent taking down of a video from jw.org. We've all heard about this now, the one where the mother is shunning her daughter so much that even to the point of not answering her phone call. She thought it was perfectly fine. The lady thought it was perfectly fine to take it down, as they're changing from doing that. So why should it be on there, right? Old news. I said, well, removing or changing things on there prevents people or makes it harder to research the history of the organization. But I told her there are archival sites that you can see everything on, back all the way back to Russell's day. One example is called Watchtower Wayback. So then she was telling me how she has no problem with the changes. Sorry, I'm got a frog in my throat. Or she might have said refinements, but as it shows, the organization is always learning and improving. And she used an analogy, which they often do. But her analogy was like, say when we have like little kids, our first kids, and we are disciplining them, but then as the years go by, we find better ways to do it, right? We learn. So it's the same with the organization. I responded that it is not a good analogy because us as a parent or as parents are not claiming to be the only channel of truth on earth. She looked at me with a puzzled face as though I was saying something crazy or incomprehensible. So that's about it for that.